Hi everyone, I'm Rob Panting, the Communications Manager from OxLEP. Welcome to our latest digital Q&A. This time we're focusing on the cultural and creative sectors. And without further ado, I'll hand you over to our chair, Howard Bentham.
Thanks, Rob. Hello, I am Howard Bentham, and this is the next in our series of digital Q&As from the Oxfordshire Local Enterprise Partnership. Welcome. At OxLEP, we want to provide a platform for Oxfordshire businesses. We aim to share expert opinion from members of our invited panels that provide a really useful, interactive and relevant forum as we all continue to evolve our businesses and our lives shaped by this pandemic. This Q&A will ask, how critical is this time for our cultural and creative sectors? These sectors are hugely important in their own right in terms of economic footprint and employment in Oxfordshire. They spur innovation across the local economy, as well as contribute to numerous other channels for positive social impact. It's well documented how this area of our economy has a massive influence on our health and well-being, education, inclusion, and urban regeneration. However, cultural and creative industries are among the hardest hit by the pandemic. The venue-based sectors such as museums, cinemas, performing arts, live music and festivals have been decimated by social distancing measures. It's also worth noting that large cities often contain the greatest share of these particular jobs at risk. The sharp drop in revenues puts their financial sustainability in real jeopardy and has resulted in reduced wage earnings and layoffs, with repercussions for their suppliers from creative and non-creative sectors alike. During this Q&A, we'll focus on the initial impact COVID-19 has had on the creative and cultural sectors, how the sectors have evolved, including further embracing innovation, and what the new normal might look like for these industries in Oxfordshire and indeed nationally and internationally. There are a number of really useful links and information sheets on all matters relating to the COVID-19 pandemic, and you'll find them on the OxLEP website. Do take time to follow up the information mentioned in this broadcast at oxfordshirelep.com. So let me introduce our panel today. We're delighted to have with us to discuss Oxfordshire's cultural and creative sector, Lucinda Whiteley. Lucinda is currently Creative Director at Novel Entertainment, known for creating and developing successful children's character brands for film and television worldwide. Her career spans not just television, but theatre, video, film and publishing. Among her many achievements, she was part of the commissioning team for The Big Breakfast during her time at Channel 4. She was also responsible for bringing to the small screen award-winning shows such as Hollyoaks and Ant and Dec Unzipped. Before setting up Novel Entertainment, Lucinda worked at Universal Pictures, producing the award-winning series Vietnam for PBS. She's also been a vice chair of the World Summit on Children's Television, a board member of BAFTA and a founding member of Children's BAFTA. She's currently proud to be a board member of the Oxford Technology and Media Network, OxLEP's Culture and Visitor Economy subgroup, and is a judge at the Rose D'Or 2020. Guy Gadney is with us. Guy is the co-founder and CEO of Charisma.ai, an organisation that powers interactive narrative experiences for broadcasters, games companies and immersive media. He's a multi-award-winning digital media leader with over 20 years' experience in cutting-edge consumer products. He's led digital content teams for media and telecoms companies internationally, working across the spectrum from large corporate to start-up environments. He was founder and group director of the Project Factory and led its successful acquisition in 2015 by London-based agency Way to Blue. He's chair of the Board of Trustees at the Old Fire Station, the charity-run culture hub in Oxford, and a former pupil of the Dragon School in the city, which boasts an alumni of creatives including Sir John Mortimer, Hugh Laurie and Tom Hollander, to name just a few. And we've also got with us Dr. Victoria McGuinness. Vicky is Head of Cultural Programming and Partnerships in the Humanities Division of Oxford University. She's worked in museums and higher education for the last 15 years and has a PhD in the area of museum and cultural project management. Victoria has undertaken roles in Greece, Spain and Portugal on archaeological and museum projects. Before joining the Oxford Research Centre in the Humanities, she was at the Ashmolean Museum as a project manager for 7 years, working on its £61 million redevelopment, and also managed the creation and development of the Broadway Museum. She's a trustee of the Museum of London Archaeology and the Museum of Oxford Redevelopment Trust, and is a member of the Oxford Castle Committee. A very warm welcome to all of our panelists. Lucinda, if I can start with you, tell us how the global pandemic has directly affected your business.
Well, my business, as you say, is television principally, and it's interesting because it has affected it massively, as it has affected so many industries and businesses. And I think I won't dwell on it, but the statistics have been described as eye-watering in terms of the loss of jobs, the impact on creativity, the impact on longevity, the impact on prospects for individuals and huge companies that you would not think would necessarily be impacted. And it's a knock-on. So I've had people saying to us, well, you work in the digital arena, so you'll be fine because everybody's online right now. And actually, it's interesting to think about the consequences of that. Everybody is online. It's nothing like we've experienced before because everybody is online. They're doing everything online. So they're learning, they're shopping, they're just doing everything. So interestingly, our business is one where we create communities. And I think if you said to me, what is the one word that I take away from the pandemic and I take away from where we are now, it's looking to your own communities. And I think that how it's affected us is it has made us look at the way that we operate nationally and internationally. We have, as you say, a wide reach. One of the shows that we make is called Horrid Henry, and it has a very vibrant community, kids who love it, actually young people who love it too, because it's been around for a while. And what was interesting to us, I imagine as most people did, we reacted instinctively to what was happening. We had very little notice. We had to think about, first of all, our own working family. How could we protect them? Largely freelance. Could we put in place contracts, for example, for them? Could we guarantee some income across a period of time, which fortunately we were able to do? One of the joys of being an independent, we could move very quickly in that respect. And then how did we work with our wider community? And one of the interesting things about having Henry is that he's a bit of a star in his own right. And so we very, very quickly had families, children writing to us and saying, well, what's Henry doing right now? How is Henry dealing with the pandemic? And that was very interesting because up until then, we hadn't thought about it as being a social responsibility. So we pivoted, a word that's much overused now, but I think describes how we all reacted to this. And we went into overdrive. Creatively, it has been a very intense period for us because there were suddenly so many ways that we could connect with our audience. So we created a podcast, we created online activities. Henry does something called Horrid Homework, which is the fun part of after you've done your homework, you go and do your horrid homework. So we were able to explore a lot of different ways of connecting. One of the other impacts, again, coming back to this word community for us, was looking locally and our connections. I suddenly found that I was having conversations with people locally here in Oxfordshire, where I might normally have been on a train to London to have a meeting with a broadcaster. I was actually online talking to all sorts of local creatives, local organisations, governmental organisations. That's been fascinating and has been one of the hugely valuable things about this. And as I say, we're going to talk about it more. But for me, a key word is community. Just one other word about digital, which I think is interesting, is that this sense that that it's a substitute for the way that we all operate and work and live is an interesting one because there is a huge digital divide, and that became very apparent as well. And I think that's something else that working in this area of media technology, connectedness, we have a responsibility to think about as well. So that's something else that we've been very focused on.
Guy, tell us about your organisation and how you've had to adapt and the direct impact it's had on you.
Well, I mean, firstly, I think we're very much of that cut that Lucinda mentioned. The people say, "Oh, well, you know, you're in the digital entertainment business. You'll be fine." But this is a very human pandemic. It's not just about sector by sector. And I think what we have realised, you know, as we talk now in the middle of lockdown 2, is quite what that impact is psychologically, and that is sort of, I suppose, the driver for creativity. Our psychology is the driver for creativity. so there is a cascading impact, I think, in whatever sector you're in. As it happens, we were scheduled to launch an enormous project with Sky, a sort of interactive thriller online in at the end of March, and also an interactive set of comic books all run through our apps also at the end of March and April, and they were due to launch in Austin, Texas, in San Francisco, in LA, I was going in Madrid, in Lille. I was going to be in more overseas cities than I'd ever been sort of in the period of 3 weeks for many years. And of course, all of that came down like a guillotine. So straight away, there was a very clear impact. And I think it's fascinating to go back and remember that, because I say it's a guillotine, but actually, if you remember back, it was an accelerating wave of impact that grew and grew, and things were being cancelled on a sort of larger and larger scale at that point. So yes, it did have a significant impact on us, and I think as with many other organisations, and I single out the old fire station here, as you mentioned, I'm chair of them. We responded in a way which was similar to theirs, which is, are we all okay? How are we feeling about this? Are we okay? Because we need to move very fast. We recognise that this is going to have a significant impact on people, on employees, and the first thing I think that people felt was a sense of confusion. Am I going to be okay? What, not only in terms of my job and my role, but my health. It's a pandemic. It's a medical condition. So, so I think the moment we got through that first phase, there was a sense of, okay, what now do we do? There was a pent up sense of wanting to release our thoughts and our energies. And for us, it manifested in an entire 3-dimensional cube of different ways. But I think we could not do the marketing and PR that we expected, because the headlines were dominated by COVID. So we focused very much on improving what we know. As Lucinda says, focused on community, focused on the people, the network, the business network, on our own organisation. Through the old fire station, that was very much involved in the Oxford Hub and Oxford Together, and is a whole other sort of wonderful story in that sense. And if I single out, the many innovations that we had during the period, one of which we adored was working with Creation Theatre, Oxford company, and Big Telly Theatre company in Northern Ireland, to produce a digital version of Alice in Wonderland. And it was so ambitious. It was crazy ambitious of combination of really not just sort of doing a Zoom call, but acknowledging that actually the audience was part of the cast. And the moment you start from that, everything goes crazy. How on earth do you control an audience like that? And we and to sort of find and to tell that the story off, actually, this week we finished the last piece on that project, which was that we wanted to chronicle it. We wanted not just to do it, but to then interview all of the cast, all of the crew, and not just say how did we do it and produce a handbook, but actually to chronicle how people felt about it, and the fact that in some ways for a freelance community we were offering something for them to contribute to, and a sense of positivity. And I feel that this lockdown 2, we're actually having to do it the same way. In some ways, this lockdown 2 is meant to be a lockdown light and a lot shorter. But actually, we find it's quite triggering for a lot of people who go back into that space. So we're being about that and giving people the level of positivity that we possibly can.
Vicky, take us through how your organisations and your particular part of this sector has responded.
Thanks. Yeah, I think a lot of what I've heard already, I can mirror into our own organisation. And of course, the University of Oxford is one organisation, but of course, actually, it's a huge and diverse grouping of different entities. And my part of it is the Humanities division and the research area. But of course, as a whole, we're working and our focus is to enable teaching and research to continue. Some of that research is indeed vaccine research, but research of all kinds and disciplines. And much like Guy and Lucinda have spoken about here, the moment at which the world went home was a difficult one. It was difficult because from our perspective, we've been able to do things digitally before, but never have we ever had a time where it was the only option for everyone. And that made us move very quickly. It also made us up our home Wi-Fi. As you can see, I come to you from my front room, be it with all my bits and bobs in the background. And this is how all of our team have worked, just like everyone else. And the things I'd love to pick up on, just to reflect how our organisation has reacted, and to mirror some of the things and answer and reflect on what Guy and Lucinda have said, is about that local, but also I'd like to talk about the global. So locally, of course, is very much the human element, and I completely hear you and how relieved I've been to have digital ways of connecting to people, thinking of the brilliant work that ArcT and Waste to Taste and other amazing entities in Oxford who have come out supporting and enabling these connections to continue in a human level for those that may not be online. And I think that's a really important point too. And globally, thinking about the opportunities. Now, I don't want to think gratuitously, and I'm not at all, but the way I always think of things is, of course, right, let's fix things, let's deal with the problems, and then what's the positive thing we can bring out of this? Yes, I'm at home, I'm currently sat on the floor in my front room, but I've got good Wi-Fi, and actually I know everyone else is at home too. So those people I wanted to connect with who are in different parts of the world, actually I know they're at home too. That sounds slightly weird. I'm not chasing people down, but actually I've been able to connect to industry partners that I hadn't been able to get on the phone before, and we've had several conversations during this long period of be it lockdown or remoteness. And it's great to have those opportunities to chat, even like this, over a video call, and think about what can we do as organisations together now, in the future, when we're out of this, and we will be out of this, and realise, okay, our industry is hugely affected, as they all are, but what can we do coming out of it? So public engagement is fundamental for our area of research, and connecting with cultural organisations to do performing arts and music and historic reflection. What can we do in the future? So what are we doing? We've done it all online. We've found the positivity from it. And I think a key stat just to end on there is the in-person events we would have done would have attracted audiences of around 2,000 to 3,000 people, which is brilliant. Unthinkable now, right, in real life. And we did online events, and they've now reached 36,000 people from 23 different countries globally. So we've been able to share some of researchers' work and the interactions with other organisations to a whole much bigger audience. And it's something we're really, really proud of, and definitely something we'll take with us when we come out of this, and we will.
Yeah, that's amen to that. Absolutely. Lucinda, let's just talk money for a moment. The creative economy makes an enormous contribution to the cultural fabric. We're all aware of that. But when you actually look at the money, it contributes £111 billion. It did in 2018, certainly. Do you think that's been forgotten by those in government?
Do I think it's been forgotten, the amount that's contributed?
Just the sheer weight that this part of the economy actually has to the bigger picture.
I don't think it's been forgotten, but I think when you read it, I think it is such a wide range of creative, what you might call industries of creatives. I think, ranging from big buildings, the big institutions, to tiny, tiny little operations. I think it's very hard to look across all of those. And I think it's back to what Guy was talking about, which is it's basically about the human. It's basically about surviving. And when you read interviews with some of even the very large institutions, they're talking about finding ways not to lose money. Basically, they're not talking about success. They're not talking about these huge, contributing these huge sums. So I think it's hard for everyone.
And Guy, just again staying on that, I mean, the sector has a high proportion of freelancers. Just looking at some the stats on this, I mean, it's 15% of the working population is freelance in the general working population, 47% in the creatives. So what are they doing to survive? It's really difficult. So many have, to use a phrase, have fallen through the net.
Yes, and I think yes.
Sorry, Guy.
I'm sorry. There are large areas of people who are not catered for, as you say, who don't qualify for the subsidies. That does need to be dealt with.
Sorry, Guy, would you like to pick up on that?
No, I agree with that, and I think it in some ways it's the double-edged sword of that big number, which is that it is a big number and it's incredibly impressive, and it is one of the things that this country does incredibly well, and yet it oversimplifies the picture, which is that we are not all made up of limited companies and officially trackable entities. There is an enormous amount of self-employed and people who go from production, because that's the nature of the industry. If you take a particular theatre production, it will spin up for 2 weeks, publicly, and then stop. And what we need to do is think about what happens in the other 50 weeks that performer who played on stage or in whichever form they did, what they're doing and how that comes through. And it is complicated, and I think there have been significant headlines saying what's going on with this sector, because it is vital. The other thing to add to it is that it's not an enormously resilient one. So it's not like all of these freelancers are sitting there with enormous bank balances that are then going to last them throughout the entire pandemic. It's a lot more fragile than that, and I hope that the government structures that continue to be put into place do focus on that. However, I also think that there has been an enormous amount of innovation through this, that per force we've got to think our way out of it, and I hope that as much as possible we can think our way out of it within the sector that we operate. In other words, we're not retraining from a ballet dancer to IT to in reference a particular ad. I mean, it's you need the ballet dancers. We need that, and I think it is sort of incumbent on all of us, which is what we were trying to do with Alice, to experiment, but then share that knowledge and share it out and say, this is a solution. This is a solution which is commercially viable. Where we made a lot of mistakes, and we want to share those mistakes so that other people don't need to.
Yeah, Vicky, do you want to pick up on that? Because obviously in your realm as well, there'll be so many freelancers that, as Guy rightly says, you're the star of the show for 2 weeks, and then you've got to do something else to pay the bills for 52 weeks, but you don't want to necessarily train and go into IT. So how are people surviving? What stories have you heard?
Yeah, I mean, we work with a lot of local cultural partners particularly, but of course all different types of organisations. And I think something to highlight is that it's not just the smaller organisations, it's the larger ones as well that are struggling. And certainly it's really telling how much they all rely on freelancers, and therefore the effect is on those individuals. As a university, we are finding that actually those one of our areas of expertise, of course, is knowledge exchange, which means a mutual relationship with a researcher and an external organisation. Now, those external organisations do not have the capacity or the ability right now to connect, so that will have later impacts on future government assessment of research impact, for example, which is a fundamental funding stream for universities. So there are future effects coming, but that's further down the line, of course. I think the ripples of this pandemic will keep on coming for some time. what we're seeing at the moment is the immediate, and I think to a large extent, very large plaster that's been put on the wound by the government, which is great. I think there's a lot of good stuff that's been done by the government, and I've been heartened to see how many of my colleagues and partners have received funding. Of course, that plaster will only stay on for some time, and the gap is the freelancers. And I think wherever possible, we need to think exactly as a community and as a sector how we can ensure, one, they're okay now, but actually when the ripple comes back again, how can we ensure that this structural setup doesn't affect them in such a way? They're taking all the risk, right? They're taking the issues. The benefit is they get to work in lots of different areas. I'm sure there's many other benefits, but if they are such a fundamental resource, we need to think about how we can work with them in a more, I don't know, in a better way. That means that let's hope we don't get other pandemics, but let's think about ways we can support them. And I think hopefully that's something the government will think about in the next waves of the support and funding they're able to offer us.
Just before we move away from that, Lucinda, you were nodding there, and that word community came back out. You must employ and come across so many freelancers. You think animators, cameramen. It's the same in the world I inhabit, and suddenly there's no work. What stories of survival have you been hearing?
Well, I think we're a very, very resolute tribe, and I think that one of the things that we do very well is to connect. And I think what Vicky was saying about the idea that it is incumbent on us as organisations to support those freelancers. One of the things that's really struck me during this time is the sharing of knowledge and information and understanding, for example, if you are a fundraiser, how do you access funds? There has been a lot of opportunities. There have been a lot of opportunities to access funds. How do you do that? How do you write those applications? How do you simplify them? I know that OxLEP's been working very hard in that respect to get the information out there, to share it across lots and lots of different communities in terms of to encourage people to apply. But it's not, if you're a freelancer and you're looking for work, you are not going to be going out and trying to access all of those different funds. And I think there's a huge amount of work that we can all still do to help people in that respect. I think that's very important.
Guy, if we can look at innovation and try and find out how innovation has been embraced by the creative and cultural sectors, some examples you might want to share with us.
Well, I think it starts at the top in some ways with the government and with Innovate UK, that has done an incredible job this year. And the advice we were given very early on, which was that the private sector was not going to be opening its wallets, the venture capital sector was not going to be opening its wallets, but that it would be government that would. And Innovate UK is an organisation which does fund and does support, obviously, given its name, innovation in this country. Did some very rapid and significant interventions of very quick turnaround sort of applications that would go straight in and be judged straight away, and then the money would come straight out. So their turnaround, which is normally weeks, months, was down into days, and so I commend them enormously in that. I think obviously from a digital perspective, as a lot of people were spending a lot more time using digital communications, then that became the source of communication. And someone who were maybe used to communicating their message out through a stage or through other media found that they were having to get to know how to use Zoom or any of the other platforms. And my belief always is that the digital media is like a new set of paintbrushes. Actually, it's a creative piece in its own right, and you can use, say, a piece of video software or games engine or audio or a little mini game or whatever as part of the messaging you're putting out there. And we haven't mentioned the game sector yet, which is an enormously creative sector and huge part of this whole landscape. And that is a medium for expression in its own right. I think, it probably exposed people who to new forms of communication, new forms of technology that they probably hadn't been used to. And I do think it will. I think next year will be a tough year economically, but equally the amount of new ideas and inspiration that have come because of that enclosed nature that we've had to live in will force out brilliant new ideas. So actually, from a creative perspective, I think we will move forward incredibly rapidly in the next year and see innovations we couldn't have possibly thought about 12 months ago.
That's really interesting. Lucinda, just picking up on that with Guy's point there that, if you like, online has become the stage. I know many are worried that by sort of giving content away for free, if you like, it somehow sets a precedent that creative work lacks value.
Yes, that's interesting. That's an interesting point. Was it Picasso that said, "You show me how you value my work by paying for it"? So I think it's yes. So what do? Do you exhibit your work? Do you allow people access to it? And how do you monetize it? There are many different ways to monetize your work online, and they're not always obvious. And I think it comes down to how do we define success? How do we define value within creativity? I think there's something else very fundamental that we should be discussing about the word creative. What does creativity mean? How is it always something that has to be part of an economy? There's a lot of business language around the word creative and creativity, and I think that's fine as long as we don't forget what it's actually about in the first place. And it's about innovation. It's about creating meaning from nothing. It's, an artist will start with nothing and create something. And I think we shouldn't underestimate its value to the to mental health and to the general economy in terms of it. I think it's a great creative spaces can be a great place to level up. It's probably where we meet at our most diverse. For example, the diversity of the creative world is incredible, I think. And so I think all of those things need to be factored in when we think about it. So is it better to keep your work to one person who's going to pay for it, or is it better to have 36,000 people watching your lecture because they can? You choose as an artist.
Or both. You offer it in both ways.
Absolutely.
But I think it's about how do we value our artists, and there are so many individuals out there whose work we might not be seeing. Digital does offer that opportunity.
Vicky, has the cancellation of festivals over the summer further removed opportunities for creatives to show and develop new work? I know you're involved with something called the Big Tent Project, which I think is worth giving a platform to.
Oh, thanks. Yeah, so we were actually going to have an actual big tent. So we're getting a new Humanities building in Oxford, and we were going to do some placemaking, and we were literally about to launch a month-long programme of in-person events. We had so many performers lined up and different things. It was going to be great. Of course I can say that because so we took the principle of everyone's welcome in our big tent and took that online. So yeah, we pivoted, as Lucinda said, quite quickly in order to make that happen. But I think as well that your points there about festivals and opportunities. I think opportunities overall have both narrowed. But now I think I agree with Guy's point. The longer term, we will see more open up. That is because humans are always very good at finding ways through. The caveat I would say to that, and I'm sure my colleagues on this call would agree, is the diversity of who gets through. Because something we struggle with and something we work really hard on in museums is about diversity of audience, diversity of people working in museums. I was always told, classics is not for people, for like myself from council estates. And then lo and behold, here I am with a classics degree and working in museums. So I worry about people like me who won't have the funds behind them to survive that wave we're going to see for a while. who are creative and brilliant. We may lose them to other places. I'm sure they'd be great there too. But I think we're going to see an issue ongoing as to who our audiences are, who we're able to reach. That is, of course, a thing, and something Lucinda mentioned there about who has access to digital platforms. Not everyone will have the same sort of level of access. So I think that there's a difference there in who we can reach and who we can bring in. The financial aspect is essential. Even if the event is free or not, someone's paying. Yeah. And for us, recognising the need of a diverse funding model, income generating model, is going to be a problem ongoing, because what we can see already is tickets. If you buy tickets online to watch something, it will make some money. It won't make as much money as filling a theatre repeatedly. So it's not a like for like. And something we also recognise, because the Big Tent has been successful online, we found that performers were not wanting to perform on Zoom, or some were saying, oh, well, I can if you want me to. Making sure the quality of our work doesn't go down is really important. Performing music on Zoom doesn't come through as well as it could do on other platforms and using other software. So we made a decision. We would do performances once we were able to, audience free, in a space with more professional cameras. Not dissing my laptop, but it is just my laptop. And I think that's really important, and that's part of our support we can provide to performers and creatives, to make sure that they're not having to dilute the quality of what they're doing in order to make money. And I think that's something we've taken away from this period too. But yeah, bring on the festivals, I say.
I guess that's where you come in then, Guy, with your AI and what you can offer to, if you like, up that quality. So it really is performance standard that you're getting every time that we are watching this stuff online.
Yeah, and let me just sort of add to what Vicky said. It was maddening to watch the large institutions put their performances online for free. It made me furious to see it, because what it did was it chopped off at the ankles the ability for people, the smaller organisations, to charge for their work. And I think I understand why they did it. But actually, my sense was that they just felt they couldn't charge for it. And that was an incorrect decision. And for the large organisations to have done that, I think was not the right decision at all. With Alice Creation Theatre, have always had the principle of charging, and it holds up and it works, and it should be the case. I think with as we get to things like Zoom, and again, Vicky, you were talking about some performers not being comfortable on Zoom. That's quite natural, because it's a different medium. Yep. It is like it's similar to asking a theatre performer to perform in front of a professional camera. It's a different way of doing things. So, and I learned this through again the experience of doing these Zoom theatre pieces, is that when actors were being auditioned, they were being auditioned for Zoom, and some it can't do it, or it doesn't fit with them in a natural way because that's their acting style or whatever. So I think what we're doing, with our approach to AI, Howard, that you're asking about, again, philosophically, our view is that technology, to date, quite naturally, has been developed by technology companies. And that's great, because they're developing technology and it sort of works. But if you get a technology company like Google, Facebook, Amazon, developing technology that is then applied to the creative industries without involving the creative industries, it's not going to work. Case point, Zoom. Zoom, trying to produce a piece of theatre with Zoom is we just broke it on so many different levels. Or similarly with what we're doing with Charisma.ai is about characters, right? So what Google and Facebook and the others, sort of the big tech companies do, they do chatbots, and that's great. But what they're for is they're for call centers. They're for search engines. So they're trying to get you in and out of the conversation, answer your question in 0.0001 of a second, and it says so on Google's homepage. That's not our world. Our world is where a story immerses you and you want to stay in it for as long as possible, that we engage people with these things. And so applying a piece of technology that's about a chatbot to that environment where we want to keep people, it's just a mismatch, which is why we built what we built. So, our approach, I think, is not totally unique, but I know, because just through connected around the world, there aren't that many people who think in that way, because I think everyone leaps into the bright, shiny toys of tech and go, oh, look, we could do this. But actually, it's quite hard to rethink what it means as an actor to act in front of Zoom, what it means to tell a story through the medium of a chat bot, or and map. What we actually are finding is we're finding that the stories are the ways of telling these stories are almost pre-book. It's sort of around the campfire, or the wandering minstrels, who brought in local stories from, they would go to a local town, sit in the bar, listen to all the gossip, and then they'd do their story. Well, nowadays we call that personalization. So there's a nice sort of parallel, I like to think, with the old ways we tell stories, and then the ultra newer one that we do with AI.
Even Santa will be doing his thing on Zoom this year, so we'll watch out for that. Let's just think about the physical spaces for a moment. Lucinda, theatres, cinemas, stadia, concert halls could actually be the very last places to fully open up, because obviously it's where people crowd in big numbers. How important is it that this is addressed quickly, that we can get bums on seats?
Well, I think just rewinding that question a little bit, I think one of the things, as Guy's talking, that I've been thinking about is how we tell our stories and what our stories are, how important they are. And it is all about storytelling at the end of the day. Everybody has a story to tell. We want to exchange them. We want to learn from them. And so for me, when I think about going back into some of those spaces, there's obviously, as Guy says, this is a medical situation, there's a safety situation. So, and you have to work with people in terms of how they feel that they can adapt themselves to that. But what is it that means that we need to be face to face? I think that's what's been interesting to us, is what are the things that you cannot replicate? And it's not only about performance, it's about exchanging ideas as well. It's about being in the same room as people, and what value do you get from that creative endeavor? So I think the conversations that we would be having in terms of whether you move back into some of those spaces, I think you need to give them time to make them work, so that we all understand what it is that we need from that experience. What is it about going to the theatre that is really, really important? And then how do you do that in the safest possible way?
And Vicky, I mean, just taking that one step further, given the close relationship between cultural venues and towns and cities, how critical is it for the sector to work for the benefit of the local economies?
Yeah, I think you're right. It is essential, because just going back to what I said about diverse funding models that organisations rely on, of course, we get income from all different spaces. So the ticket income is fundamental, and therefore enabling capacities that are financially viable for organisations are essential. Of course, I totally agree with Lucinda, but that's the additional point I thought I'd add there. We are building a new Humanities centre in the middle of Oxford, and a major part of it will be a public space. So there will be a 500-seater concert hall, there'll be lecture theatres, exhibition halls. Now, of course, if we have to have spaces in between, like Ultimate Picture Palace and Playhouse, are all thinking about and planning for, the ticket income will be less. The funding models will not work, and we will see fewer of our organisations, not just the smaller ones, the larger ones too, being able to keep their doors open. That means they will have to think about programming. I worry about people and the innovative and experimental pieces that might not have filled, the spaces. They might think, okay, well, we'll do fewer of those because we need to make sure we get numbers in. So I think, yes, it's fundamental that we find a way forward and we can all come together again. I would say, the University of Oxford is 900 years old. This is not our first plague, right? We've had others. Yeah, speaking as somebody from the humanities, history shows us that, plagues have come and gone before. And of course, what we've got is amazing researchers around the world that are all looking as to ways we can come together. And what I hope is we don't lose our digital, innovative thoughts and connections we created in this time. And actually we take them out and think, what can we do when we are able to see in person, but still do brilliant things together digitally in the future?
Guy, what Vicky said there is absolutely spot on, but it does some of this boil down to just old-fashioned personal confidence that I can go and put my bum on that seat and I will be okay. It is a health situation, of course, that we're talking about. So is there something, again, within the sort of creative AI world that can help that level of confidence, do you think?
Yeah, very much. And I think the other thing to factor in is that while, within a certain bracket, I think the profitability of a certain performance might only be achieved at, say, 80% capacity in the old days. And yet now we can only fit 45% of the auditorium because of social distancing. So naturally, straight away, there is a complete economic reason why this is not going to work. And I would hope that the way we're thinking about it is not to reduce the cost of the production, because that's just going to trickle down to exactly and cause exactly the problem that we were talking about with freelancers, but more to find ways in which, and also, by the way, not to increase ticket prices, because then that reduces the diversity and accessibility of the production. So to get it out using, say, using digital media, finding other revenue streams, not looking at different productions, physical productions taking place solely in one physical space, but having 10, 15 different smaller revenue streams. That's a very digital way of looking at things. I remember sort of having this realization a while ago that you shouldn't be penalized because this particular revenue stream is only bringing in sort of 50, 100 quid, because actually when you cascade them all up, you've now got a viable production, and all of those need to add up. The other thing I do think is that we, even when these doors open again, even when we're out of lockdown, we will have a psychological recovery period that we need to factor in, because you can tell that amongst certain demographics, they're simply going to be scared to go back into physical venues because the person behind them might have a cough, and that cough might be infectious and. So I think we need not to hold out and go, oh, well, thank God after Christmas, all the doors are going to be open again. We should be factoring these in now, because that will make us more resilient next year. And I think, again, to your question, Howard, I think to think not only about taking a single performance and creating multiple streams out of it, but looking at that performance and how it may be recrafted to fit the digital medium. So you're not just, plonking a bit of video onto YouTube and then putting a charge on it. That's not going to work. But you're back into sort of Marshall McLuhan media philosophy of messages matching the medium. If you've got a production and you're going to do something with it digitally, then think about how that piece might work properly digitally. And then it'll resonate with the audience. The audience will feel that there's value in it, and they'll pay for it.
I think time that we summed up our thoughts really, and get the old crystal ball out and look ahead to maybe say this time next year. How do we see the picture? How many survivors? What will the cultural and creative sector look like? Lucinda?
Oh, that is a very hard question. It's a very hard question. But I am optimistic about keeping the doors open. I think that we all have a responsibility to do that, to keep the conversations going, to keep the surprising connections going. So we're, for example, one of the organisations that grew out of the pandemic, the Oxfordshire Kindness Wave, who work with the Oxfordshire Virtual School, fantastically creative in terms of what they've done and achieved and what they continue to achieve. And so those sorts of connections, we're working with them with something with Horrid Henry at the moment. I want to really be able to keep those going. So I'm slightly sidestepping your question, Howard, and I'm sorry for that. But I think that generally it's keeping those doors open, keeping those conversations going, and let's make these cultural places together.
Vicky, paint the picture in 12 months' time.
Yeah, I think 12 months is a realistic landscape, because I think what we've all seen so far is each time the goalpost is there, it's moved. And I think that's right, because we need to reflect on what the research and medical advice is. I am also hopeful. I'm looking at a digital programme. So the aims of the Humanities Cultural Programme is to build and support amazing and innovative projects that will lead us into our new humanities building. Another key aspect of it is to build audiences. Okay, and those two things can be done and need to be done physically and digitally. So actually we're using this period for that. What I would say is exactly the point you made, which is who's going to be left. And I think what's so important is that we keep those conversations going, as we've talked about community already. We need to talk to people who might be quieter than usual. There may be reasons they're quieter, making sure that we keep open as much as possible and keep those conversations going so that we can continue in person. And there will be a transitional period, I think, probably after that 12 months, I reckon. But I'm looking on a very hopeful 5-year scale. I've written some ideas down for those future years, and there's some brilliant, exciting things coming up in the foot. There's a Kafka anniversary, guys. There's a Dante anniversary. Let's think about what we can do digitally there, but also hopefully in person in 2022, 2023, and 2024 too.
Guy, obviously you work in AI, so you've seen what the future is. What is it? Tell us.
Someone pointed out to me the other day, I do feel a bit like Cassandra, who knows the future, but no one believes me. I mean, I think I would say it because I work in it, but artificial intelligence is an enormous and all-encompassing technology that sort of is already there, and that we don't quite know yet about its ramifications, and it's so I think that will grow, and it's difficult to describe how, because it's such a broad piece. My hope is that, as I've alluded to before, that as this period has familiarized a lot of people in the creative industries with technology, that they start now to pick up those tools and craft things in ways that they hadn't thought of before. And that may well be, I mean, using platforms like Charisma as a storytelling platform for people to write interactive stories rather than linear stories. That's a new skill, but it comes from that same creative standpoint. So I feel that the next period will be a tough one, as I said, economically. But if we can have those moments to reflect on the new opportunities that this has created, as the tides pulled back, what's left, and hopefully it's not all shopping trolleys and old tires. There is a couple of little nuggets of gold that we can pick up and develop new things with.
That's a lovely way to leave it. That's it for this OxLEP Digital Q&A. Thanks once again to our brilliant panel, Lucinda Whiteley, Guy Gadney and Vicky McGuinness. As I mentioned at the outset, we really want to hear from you about topics to discuss in coming weeks and put questions on your behalf to our invited panelists. Please follow us on our social media channels and feel free to get in touch. And don't forget the fabulous resource on the OxLEP website relating to all of the matters discussed today. Please go to oxfordshirelep.com to find out more. But for now, from me, Howard Bentham, thank you for watching, stay safe and goodbye.